I stood outside the worn-out brick building in Illinois, where the autumn wind carried the scent of dried leaves and regret, holding a paper cup of lukewarm coffee, while my daughter Lena finished locking up the small charity office we ran for the homeless. A place built not from wealth, but from wounds. Every corner of it held stories of people we fought for, people we fed, people we loved like our own, stories that kept me alive despite the weight of age, pressing on my bones. But behind those stories lurked one shadow I could never outrun. My own son, Aaron, who had drowned himself in drugs years ago and resurfaced only to take pieces of my life with him. One lie, one theft, one broken promise at a time, until even neighbors whispered that the only thing predictable about Aaron was the destruction he carried like a curse. Yet I, foolish in hope, still opened the door when he knocked at midnight, begging for shelter, food, forgiveness, everything except the one thing he needed. The courage to change, but the day he hacked into the trust accounts of our charity, draining nearly $100 billion meant for the sick, the starving, and the forgotten, was the day something inside me finally shattered, because that money wasn't just numbers, it was breath for someone who had none, a wheelchair for someone who couldn't walk, medicine for someone counting hours, and I watched him smile while burning it away on drugs, cars, women, and cheap luxury hotels that stank of smoke and shame. In that moment, I realized the boy I raised had died long ago, replaced by a creature shaped by addiction and greed. And even a father's heart has limits, so I went to the authorities myself, confessed everything. And when the police stormed our home that evening, Lena and I were taken in for questioning, our wrists cold in metal cuffs, even though we were innocent, because the world does not pause to ask who the real thief is, but just when the weight of humiliation felt unbearable, my old friend Mason, the best lawyer in Chicago, and a man whose handshake had once saved my business from ruin, walked into the station with the kind of authority that makes even walls straighten. And he looked me in the eyes and said, "Tell them everything. Every detail. Don't protect him this time." So I did, my voice trembling as years of pain poured out. And for the first time, I spoke of Aaron not as a lost son, but as a dangerous man sinking deeper into a darkness he chose willingly. And while I spoke, detectives exchanged grim looks because, unbeknownst to me, Aaron had already crossed a line far darker than theft. He had fallen in with a gang known on the streets as the Serpents, a group infamous for drug trafficking, extortion, and disappearances no one dared investigate. And my heart twisted when the officers revealed he had not only bought drugs from them, but was now helping distribute them across 3 states, using the stolen charity money to fund their operations, turning innocent lives into currency for his addiction. And I felt my chest tighten with a pain no father should feel. The pain of knowing your child has become the very monster you spent your life fighting. But consequences have a way of catching up faster than guilt does, because while we were still in the station, a call came through that the Serpents had turned on Aaron after he bragged about having endless money and bragged about stealing from old fools who trusted him. Words that spread like poison, angering the gang leader who didn't tolerate loose mouths. They beat him, robbed him, and left him half dead behind an abandoned warehouse. And when officers found him, he was delirious, begging for drugs, unable to stand, trembling like a child lost in a storm. And though my heart broke, I didn't rush to him the way I once would have, because this was the moment every wrong choice he ever made had been leading toward. And deep inside, I knew he needed to face the mirror without me shielding him from its cracks. Meanwhile, the media erupted with headlines about charity fraud, the stolen billions, and the moral weight of a father turning in his own son. And overnight, Lena and I became both suspects and symbols, suspects to the ignorant, symbols of moral courage to those who understood that love without accountability is not love but weakness. And as Mason battled through courtrooms clearing our name, we made a decision that shocked everyone. We packed what little we had left and left Illinois behind, choosing to rebuild our shattered peace in New York, far from the whispers, far from the memories soaked in betrayal, far from the streets where Aaron's childhood laughter once echoed before it turned into the hollow laughter of addiction. Fate, cruel and cunning, does not release you easily, because on the very morning we were meant to leave, police sirens wailed outside our temporary apartment, and officers stormed in with a warrant, not for theft this time, but for black money laundering, charges tied to transactions Aaron had made under my name without my knowledge, leaving Lena screaming and me standing motionless as they dragged us out. And in that moment, I felt the true weight of what Aaron had done, the kind of weight that crushes even the strongest men. But even as they shoved us into the back of the police car, something inside me refused to break because a lifetime of serving others. Feeding the hungry, sheltering the cold, and holding dying hands teaches you one truth. Innocence may bend, but it does not shatter. And once again, Mason arrived like a force of nature, slamming documents onto the interrogation table, showing timestamps, digital trails, and banking signatures, proving the transactions weren't mine, but forged by Aaron while high and desperate. And when the officers saw the evidence, their rigid expressions softened, replaced by the kind of guilt that comes too late to matter, and hours later they released us with apologies dripping from their mouths like rainwater from a broken gutter. But I didn't wait to hear them. I walked out of that station with Lena clinging to my arm. Her tears warm against my sleeve as she whispered, "Why does life punish the good, Dad?" And I didn't know how to answer because I too felt the sting of injustice. Yet beneath that sting lived another truth. Sometimes life doesn't punish the good. It exposes the evil, and the evil was my own son, whose choices had become a wildfire burning everything he touched. As the police launched a statewide search for him, new intelligence came in. Aaron had fled to the outskirts of Detroit, seeking refuge with the same gang that had nearly killed him, offering them what was left of the stolen money in exchange for protection. But addicts don't understand the word enough, and neither do criminals. So they used him until he was empty of money, empty of dignity, empty of the lies he once wore like a crown. And then they abandoned him in the middle of a drug deal gone wrong, leaving him to be chased by both the suppliers and the police, and for days he hid in alleys, sleeping on cardboard, trembling from withdrawal, each night haunted by hallucinations of shadows whispering his name. And maybe that was the first time in years he understood the true cost of every needle he had touched, every theft he had justified, every life he had shattered, including his own. Meanwhile, Lena and I finally made it to New York, exhausted but determined to begin again. Settling into a small apartment whose cracked walls somehow felt safer than any mansion back home. And every night we cooked simple meals served at local shelters and rebuilt our trust brick by brick. Yet even in our peace, a sharp ache lived inside me. A father's ache, the ache of knowing your child lives somewhere between danger and death. And though I told myself not to care, the truth is, the heart does not obey logic, especially not the heart of a parent. So when the call finally came from the Detroit Police Department saying, "We have your son," my knees weakened, not from fear, but from a strange mixture of relief and dread, because I knew that whatever came next would change everything. They said he had been found unconscious in an abandoned building where a failed drug exchange had erupted into gunfire. And though he wasn't shot, the officers described him as skeletal, delirious, trembling violently as paramedics tried to stabilize him, muttering apologies that didn't make sense, begging for forgiveness from people who weren't even there. And when Lena and I arrived in Detroit, the hospital smell, antiseptic mixed with sorrow, clung to the air as we entered his room and saw the boy I once carried on my shoulders reduced to a ghost wearing my son's face. Tubes in his arms, bruises like faded memories across his skin, and for a long moment I felt a storm rising in me. A storm of anger, grief, regret, and love, tangled so tightly they strangled my breath. But then his eyes opened, cloudy yet searching, and he whispered, "Dad, I ruined everything." And as much as I wanted to scream, to list every pain he caused, every life he damaged, every soul he robbed, including mine, I simply said, "Aaron, life gives every man one last chance. This is yours. Don't waste it, because forgiveness is not approval. It is release, and I needed to release the weight that had been slowly crushing me." The police questioned him, the courts prepared charges, and the world waited for justice. But I did something no one expected. I stepped away not to save him, but to save myself and Lena, because there are moments when you must choose survival over sacrifice, and this was one of them. So when the doctors discharged him directly into custody, I didn't follow the officers, didn't attend the hearings, didn't defend him in court, because a lifetime of warnings had led him to this moment, and he needed to stand before the consequences alone. And when the judge sentenced him to rehabilitation followed by prison time for fraud, drug trafficking involvement, and identity misuse, I felt a strange mix of heartbreak and peace settle inside me like dust after a long storm, because for the first time the world wasn't treating him as my son. It was treating him as a man responsible for his decisions. After everything, Lena and I returned to New York quietly, no celebration, no joy, just a calm silence that finally felt like freedom. And as days turned into weeks, we poured ourselves into charity again, feeding the homeless, counseling addicts, rebuilding lives shattered like errands, but for the first time, without guilt, without fear, without shame. And one evening while serving food at the shelter, a young man with trembling hands told me he wanted to quit drugs, that he didn't want to end up like that guy from the news who lost everything. And I felt a chill crawl through me because he didn't know that man was my son. And in that moment, I realized the universe had given me something unexpected. Purpose born from pain. Aaron had become a lesson, not a curse, and his downfall had the power to save others, to warn them before they walked the same path. And as I stood there with the city lights flickering like distant hopes, before they walked the same path, and as I stood there with the city lights flickering like distant hopes, I finally understood the moral running through every chapter of my life. Crime will strip you bare, drugs will destroy you from within, and every stolen coin becomes a debt life will reclaim with interest. But goodness, even wounded goodness, outlives the darkness. And now when I look back on everything, the father betrayed, the daughter burdened, the son consumed, the life uprooted, I do not see tragedy alone. I see survival. I see strength. I see the quiet victory of refusing to let evil turn you into something you are not. And though the world may forget our story, I never will, because the day I chose justice over blood was the day I chose to save what remained of my soul.